In the fifth module to the Introductory to HIRA for Plumbers is the Applying Risk Management Principles. To manage pure risks, the performance of the risk control activities should be measurable. How does one measure cost savings on losses that have not yet occurred, and which could or could not have been prevented by risk control measures? Frequency of incidents is not regarded as a reliable guide to safety performance. There is no clear correlation between work conditions, the severity of the incident, and the frequency of the incident. Incidents may occur by chance factors alone. This could cause deviations from the previous or expected norm. The most common method used is to measure performance in terms of the achievement of objectives. Risk control costs should not be confused with the total costs of risks. Now, risk control costs refer only to the costs of activities aimed at preventing or reducing the frequency and severity of losses from pure risks. The total cost of risk is a much broader concept which comprises the following four components: the cost of insurance premiums, the cost of uninsured losses, the cost of measures to prevent or reduce losses, as well as the administrative cost of risk management. Let us now have a look at a few aspects to consider when deciding whether to install a risk control measure or not. Property loss or damage, both tangible and intangible. Consequential loss, such as business interruption, supply interruption, loss of profits on finished goods, reduced rental income, interest on borrowed funds, increased insurance, hired labor or machinery, loss of market share, increased advertising costs. Cost of paying for liability claims, product liability, professional liability, environmental impairment liability, employer's liability, claims arising from industrial relations issues, and retained liability losses. The cost associated with injury or death of individuals, statutory insurance, personal accident insurance, group life insurance, and retained costs. And finally, pure financial or economic loss. That is any cost that is not included in the above. The most obvious way of increasing profitability is by increasing revenue, reducing costs, or both. Often, competitive pressure prevents an organization from simply raising its revenue by increasing sales or prices. The only sure way to maximize profits is by minimizing costs. Now, management in this light often views the costs of risk control. If the projected benefits exceed the cost of the risk control measure by more than, say, 18%, the investment is regarded as a favorable light. In the risk management context, the term income or benefit refers to effective income, the amount of money saved by the implementation of risk control measures. Risk control measures should be applied in the form of standards, which are to be met. Standards are normally grouped according to risk control principles, such as fire standards, security standards, and occupational health and safety standards. Standards are based on the following criteria: legal requirements, both common law and statutory requirements, the South African Bureau of Standards, or the South African Specifications and Codes Practice, accepted risk management practices, the collective advice of risk control consultants, brokers, and insurers, as well as the experience and knowledge in the organization itself. Risk control activities call for a range of disciplines, which can include fire protection, security, occupational health and safety, natural perils risk control, motor vehicle risk control, transit risk control, emergency planning and crisis management, legal liability risk control, business interruption, environmental protection, and engineering risk control. Risk financing measures are used to arrange financial resources which would compensate an organization for those losses that it may suffer from pure risk. If properly assessed and managed, it could be a contributor to the organization's profitability. There are two main options in risk financing, namely self-funding and insurance. Self-funding takes the place when losses are financed from internal sources. Self-funding could be funded on a pure funded basis or on a day-to-day basis as an operating expense. Insurance will compensate for the insured losses suffered because of an insured event. However, self-funding is a means of self-finance to pay for losses that might occur. There are three different funding methods or options. The ultimate choice will depend on the requirements of the organization in question. These options are discussed below. The unfunded option implies the deliberate self-funding of the costs of loss. In the event of loss, the cost is met with a current expense from existing resources. This methodology is intrinsically the least expensive since losses are covered without recourse to an insurer or any other party. The size of the loss that can be funded by this method will depend on the availability of the organization. The funded option requires that the cost of a loss be covered by a deliberate acceptance. Now, unlike an unfunded option, losses are not charged to a current expense, but to a revenue fund. So this fund is established in the accounts with the express purpose to provide for a loss. There must be a self-insurance reserve, which is systematically credited with the amounts necessary to meet the cost of projected claims. A captive insurance company is an insurance company that is owned by a parent company or companies. The captive insurance company writes the insurance business or some or in part of its parent company. So captive insurance is the logical development and extension of the self-insurance concept. The organization uses an owned or controlled insurance company to manage its self-insurance reserve. The decision is to use a captive is normally related to obtaining insurance cover for risks not normally insurable. It could also be used to provide consistent insurance protection for multinational companies, which are obligated to insure their interest in the company in which they reside. Now, selecting the option that is likely to be less costly to the organization is the subject of a financial analysis. The financial analysis compares and contrasts the economic effectiveness of each option. In the final analysis, the mix of options selected must not expose the organization to any unbudgeted or unexpected financial strain.